Hi everyone, this is Mr. Hall and this is a quick video about the digestive system. I'm going to talk a little bit about just the basics of where the organs are in this particular system, and I'll go into some depth about certain parts of this system, and in future videos I'll go into more depth about specific areas that you really need to know, particularly for the GCSE. So in terms of what the specification says for AQA about the digestive system, you'll notice that they say here this section assumes knowledge of the digestive system studied in Key Stage 3 science. Now, what does that even mean? It's very nebulous, very vague, not very helpful. If you read through the rest of this entry on the spec, it gives you a bit more detail about it, but it's not massively helpful. So hopefully this video will clear up a little bit about the stuff that you need to know as the basics of this system. So the objectives for today is to describe the process of mechanical and chemical digestion in the body. That's key for the basics of this system. We're going to describe what happens to food in the stomach, and we're also going to state what's made in the pancreas. Right, so let's get started by just looking at the basics. Okay, now this is the digestive system, and there are just some basic organs that you just need to know. And often you might be given a picture like this, you'll be asked to kind of fill out some labels, stuff like that. So the key thing is food obviously starts here, and this is where the mouth is. This is also where saliva is added to food, and some enzymes get added to it as well, which I'll talk about a little bit later on. You've then got the food going down this tube. We call it the gullet, although a more sort of technical word that you might like to use is called the esophagus, which is spelled like E-S-O, which is spelled like this. Sometimes an O is at the front, but sometimes just an E. Depends on lots of things. Then the food travels down here. Now this sort of little sac here is the stomach, and you'll often find that there's another organ which almost fits into it like a jigsaw piece, which is huge. I think it's the biggest organ in the body. This is the liver, which is quite important, and I'll talk about that in a future video. Okay, so that's the liver. And then the food travels down. Now, before I go into where it goes into here, you'll notice there's this yellow organ there. That is the pancreas, all right? And I'll talk about that in a minute. And then food then travels all the way through here and then goes into this. Now, what it starts going through is this kind of maze of tubes. Okay, now that is the small intestine. And that's basically where food gets absorbed into the bloodstream. And then stuff that you don't need anymore then goes into this larger tube. And that is the large intestine, all right? And then it will go out of the body via the rectum and the anus and so forth, all that waste. Now, what I'm going to be talking about today is the beginning parts of digestion. So I'll be talking about this, I'll be talking about this, I'll talk a little bit about the stomach, and I'll mention the pancreas as well, although I will embellish it a bit more in a future video about enzymes, okay? The key thing you need to understand about the digestive system is its sole function is to break down large insoluble food molecules into smaller soluble ones. That is its whole job. And it's got a number of things that it's got in order to allow that to happen. It's quite a fascinating system, really. So let's start with the mouth and saliva. Okay, so here's the mouth and also the gullet. Now, in your mouth, you've got teeth, 32 of them, and they help break down food. So that physical process of the teeth breaking down food helps break it down to smaller pieces with the aid of saliva. That is what we call mechanical digestion, okay, because it's breaking down food like that. However, you've also got saliva in the salivary glands, and that helps with that mechanical digestion, but it also contains enzymes. Now, I'm going to talk about enzymes a lot more in the future in a video, but what you need to know now is that enzymes are a type of chemical that your body produces, and those chemicals help break down food into smaller pieces, okay? So because they also break down food, they don't do it mechanically, they do it chemically. So we say that it's chemical digestion. So in the mouth, you have two types of digestion happening. You've got chemical digestion and you've got mechanical digestion. Okay, so that's what's happening in the mouth. Now, in the gullet, that's basically where food passes from after being broken down to some extent inside the mouth. Okay, so when food is swallowed, it enters the gut, well, the gullet, I should say. We also call this the esophagus, okay? And as I said before, sometimes we spell it with an O at the front, sometimes we don't. I don't think it really matters. I suspect it's because of the difference between Americanized and English spelling. Now, the gullet moves food down using a muscular contraction, and this muscular contraction is called peristalsis. Now, if you look at the animation I've got here, you can see that we've got this bit of food, and it's slowly getting pushed down by the walls of the esophagus or the gullet, sort of squeezing the food down. So that's why food is able to move down the gullet, even when you're lying down. If you're upside down, your gullet is always moving food down in that motion. So it's quite an impressive feat of engineering in your body. So that's peristalsis. So that's the mouth and the gullet. Now, the food in the gullet is going to move down and it's eventually going to end up inside the stomach. Now, the stomach, this is a sort of cutout of a picture I used before. The stomach is this sac here, all right? And there's the stomach, and this is the liver. You can ignore that for now. I'll talk about that in a future video. And just to kind of eliminate any confusion, I've sort of got rid of all the other organs around it and just isolated the stomach itself. You'll notice it contains a liquid, which I'll talk about more in a minute. So food pops inside here, and what the stomach does is it helps break food down into even smaller pieces. Now, what this food contains is this gastric juice, and that's this kind of green-looking liquid here. Now, this gastric juice, it contains a number of things. It contains enzymes. Again, we mentioned that before. They help break down food into smaller pieces. It also contains hydrochloric acid and other fluids. Now, the key thing I want to talk about here is the hydrochloric acid. A lot of students immediately think, oh, it's got to be there to break down food, but it's actually there for a number of other reasons. First off, it helps create the ideal conditions for the enzymes to work in, which I'll talk more about in a future video. It also helps kill pathogens. Now, inside food that you eat, it might contain bacteria, viruses, things like that, that you don't know are on there, but are there, right? And what that acid does, it helps kill any unwanted pathogens, which might cause you harm. So it was almost like a defense mechanism in the body. And this is where this unit sort of connects a little bit to a future unit on the AQA or any other sort of, post-16 course or even GCSE course, which is about immunity and disease and response and that kind of thing. Okay, now, as a result, because it's acidic and it's got hydrochloric acid, which is a very strong acid, it's got a very low pH, all right? So it's not a very kind of comforting environment. And what you've got here is, because of the enzymes, you've got chemical digestion. You've also got mechanical digestion. So what the stomach can do is a very similar process like peristalsis, where it's kind of crushing and sort of beating that food together into smaller pieces, okay? So you've got mechanical and chemical digestion happening here. So that's the stomach. Now, after the food is broken down to even smaller pieces, it then moves through and it will go into the small intestine. But before we move on to that, which will be in a future video, it's worth mentioning the pancreas. Now, the pancreas is over here, okay? Now, the pancreas helps basically make enzymes, okay? And what I've done is, in order to kind of eliminate confusion, you've got the stomach here and the liver here. This is the pancreas, and if I just get rid of all the other organs around it, it basically looks like this, a kind of strange kind of R-shaped organ. And those enzymes it produces, as I mentioned before, it helps break food down into smaller pieces. Now, those enzymes that it produces could go into the small intestine, it can go into the stomach, it can go to other parts of the digestive system to help break down food. Okay, so that's the pancreas. Okay, so, and that's it. So I hope the introduction to the digestive system was useful. In future videos, I'll talk more about different food types. I'll talk about digestion in the small intestine, and we'll also talk about enzymes in a bit more depth because that's pretty tough. Best of luck.